welcome to my channel. My name is Martine, and if you are new here, I do videos on Vedic astrology mainly, but also with some tropical insights, and I focus on both relationship and natal astrology. And if you like this video and you would like to hear more content from me, please like, subscribe, hit the notifications bell to see when I will post a new video. And also, if you're interested in a personal consultation, I do consultations on a wide variety of topics. Please check out the video description. I will leave my contact information there. Thank you. And also, I have relatively recently started a tarot channel, and if you're interested in getting a tarot reading from me or subscribing to my channel, you can check out the video description as well, or the comment section where I will be linking the link to my tarot channel. Okay. And today's video is going to be on a topic, again, that is somewhere between astrology and psychology. The main inspiration for this topic has come from astrology. However, it has also got me thinking about the whole psychological topic of manipulation and people who manipulate, especially when it comes to relationships. Now, first, I'm going to start by talking about where this idea came from and when did I have this realization that I want to talk about this topic. It comes from basically a lot of observation, again, that I have done based on the readings that I have done for many, many years. But especially in the past year or so, I have had some people who have purchased consultations, and especially some women who basically wanted to get a divorce, and they were asking for a consultation on the Navamsha chart to basically figure out if they're doing the right thing by wanting to pursue a divorce or not. And in a lot of these cases, I would look at the Navamsha chart and I would notice that they have moon in the 8th house in the Navamsha. And with a few of them, I actually point blank said that, just by looking at your chart, I can tell that you feel alone in this relationship. And the women would reply back like, well, how did you know that? Like, you're absolutely right. And now you might think, okay, what does moon in the 8th house in the Navamsha have to do with feeling alone in the relationship? Well, it is not one of those things that is directly apparent. It's definitely not something that I have read in any books or traditional interpretations of Vedic astrology. However, when you put things together and, more importantly, you link, general knowledge with astrological configurations, you start to notice some patterns. And in this particular situation, I think moon in the 8th house in the Navamsha tends to show, especially in a woman's chart, that the woman in question basically has used some form of manipulation to get the ring on her finger. And this is not, again, it's not something that I have read in any books. However, intuitively, I have seen it happen. And the reason for this is, well, there are two main reasons for this. First of all, it's the fact that I think in general, women in almost every society, even the most feminist out there, are still encouraged to basically be inauthentic in order to get a partner, especially in order to get married, right? If you're a woman from a really young age, you're being told that, don't voice strong opinions, don't be too contradictory, do not be angry, do not be resentful, always have a smile on your face, etc., etc. And that's just, the tip of the iceberg, because the older you get, the more pressure you feel to behave in a certain way that basically matches the male fantasy. Now, I won't get into my whole theories about why exactly these roles have evolved the way that they have, but pretty much I think that most people can agree that this is still generally true. And whereas, for instance, Moon in the 8th house in the Navamsha in a man's chart would not necessarily lead me to think that, oh, this guy manipulated his way into marriage. I mean, it could be possible, don't get me wrong. I haven't actually analyzed that many men's charts, definitely not with respect to marriage consultations. But I would say intuitively that it is far more common for women to take the path of manipulating their way into marriage when they have this configuration, especially since the Navamsha is the chart of marriage, and the moon basically shows your intelligence when it comes to dealing with a marriage partner in the Navamsha. And so this is the first thing that I wanted to say. And then it also got me to thinking about basically the topic of manipulative people in general. And I have noticed this actually, well, for a long time, and maybe some of you also have put, two and two together by looking at maybe several of my videos, that I tend to see people who are very Pluto dominant generally as manipulative. Now, there are actually different kinds of people, different kinds of manipulative people, and I won't get into that. But with respect to this topic of Moon in the 8th house, and why I thought that the women in question felt alone in the relationship, this has to do with basically psychology. And it actually got me to thinking, and again, I haven't actually read this anywhere, so I'm not 100% sure if it is true, but just based on my observations, people who manipulate, now, especially women, okay, so if you're a woman and you manipulate your way into a relationship, there are several outcomes from this action that are almost always true. In fact, based on my observation, they are literally always true. I haven't seen a case where this doesn't happen. Now, when you manipulate your way into getting a ring on your finger, first of all, it implies that you're going to feel alone because you are pretending to be something you are not, which makes sense when you think about it, right? If you are constantly pretending, you're basically putting on a show or selling an image of what you think this person wants to see, then clearly you are not being seen and accepted for who you are, okay? The person that decides to marry you doesn't even really know you. So a natural consequence of this would be the fact that you end up feeling really alone in the relationship. This would be true for pretty much anyone, regardless of their gender, their background, and so on. But again, I stress this, I think this is especially true for women because women are more encouraged to use these kinds of strategies, quote unquote, to get the ring on their finger. Okay, this is one outcome that I personally have always seen to be true. Another and potentially equally devastating consequence, especially for women in relationships, is the fact that when you manipulate your partner, okay, what does the manipulation actually mean, right? It basically means that you can count on the fact that every time you apply certain behaviors, certain treatments, certain strategies, right, behavioral strategies with respect to your partner, that you will get the result that you want and generally the result that you expect from this person, right? That's what manipulation is. And generally, people who manipulate are people who, well, they're just interested in getting something, some kind of reaction or something, sometimes something material from the person in question, right? And what happens, especially in a woman's case, when she manipulates her partner, is that eventually she loses respect for him. Because think about it this way, if you successfully, regularly manipulate the partner you are with, this can generally mean one of two things, as far as I have thought, as far as I have noticed at least. There could be things, there could be outcomes that I haven't taken into account. But as far as I have seen, there are two potential outcomes, right? Two potential reasons why this happens, right? Conclusions that a person can reach. The number one conclusion is that this person is not particularly intelligent, or rather that they are definitely not as intelligent as you are, right? Because if this person does not even realize that he is being manipulated, that basically means that, well, he doesn't see your machinations. He doesn't see the buttons that you are pressing, right? So what happens is the woman starts to lose respect for the man. Even though at first she might actually enjoy this, she might get a kick from, the satisfaction that she gets by, I don't know, getting the result that she wanted. In this situation with the Navamsha, it's getting the ring on her finger, right? Eventually what happens sooner or later is that she starts to lose respect for this guy. Either because he proves to be not particularly intelligent, or she starts to see him as less intelligent, which is a turnoff for women, not so much for men, right? But for women, it is a turnoff because women generally want men that they can see as superior, especially intellectually, or at the very least, they're equal, right? But if you are manipulating a guy, that proves that he's not as smart as you are, basically. Okay, or the second option, which is perhaps even worse, the second conclusion that a woman can draw consciously or subconsciously is that this guy is basically lacking in morality, moral fiber, integrity, basically lacks a backbone. And this especially applies to situations that I have seen, for instance, where the partner, for one reason or another, actually where the partner sees that he's being manipulated. And sometimes there's even like this weird dynamic between partners where there's like this quiet agreement where the manipulator partner knows that the manipulated partner knows that he's being manipulated, but there's no direct confrontation between these two people. And these are usually situations where the partner who's being manipulated has some kind of fears with respect to ending the relationship. It's usually something material, like, for instance, they're living in the same apartment, and even though the husband sees that his wife is less than wonderfully charming, maybe he sees that she's trying to manipulate him, he does not have the courage to confront her directly. So instead, to keep the peace and to keep the comfort, he just plays along with her games, even though sometimes they reach this point of quiet agreement almost where both of them know that she is manipulating him. And this again will lead to the wife or the woman in the relationship to generally lose respect for the man. Or, of course, there could be, I gave the example where they share the same home, but there could be all kinds of reasons. Sometimes, men end up depending financially on the woman as well. So generally, it's some kind of a circumstance where the man depends on the woman financially, or it could be because the man is getting, let's say, his physical needs met, needs for physical intimacy met, for instance. And, he is like, whatever, as long as I, as long as I get laid, quote unquote, semi-regularly, then there's no point in, confronting the partner directly because this would end the relationship. Or sometimes it's just plainly a fear of being alone, on the part of the person who's being manipulated. But whichever the situation may be, basically the person who's being manipulated realizes that they have a manipulative partner. However, they just don't have the courage to confront the partner directly. And again, these are just some conclusions now. Again, I'd be curious to know what you think. Do you agree? Do you not agree? Do you maybe have different theories? But these are things that I have noticed without reading them anywhere or researching this too much. just based on observation, okay? And I really have not come across a single situation where the woman manipulates her partner. And let's be real, ladies, I think we can tell when a woman is manipulating her partner a lot better than men, right? Men generally cannot tell. Like, but we can tell, okay? And I've never seen a case where this goes well, where it doesn't lead to misery. Usually these women, like I said, they may put up with these relationships because they get something material out of it. Like they get social validation, maybe they get the status, they get material security, whatever it is, but they're usually getting something material, right, from the relationship. But at the same time, you see these women start to become miserable, sometimes bitter in the relationship. They start to lose attraction towards their partners. And especially when it comes to women who are narcissistic, because women who are narcissistic will almost certainly use manipulation, in relationships. They are very likely to cheat, because the more they feel like they can control their partners, the more they feel like the partner is easy to manipulate, he will start to become less interesting to this woman. Now, this is the stuff that I have noticed with respect to psychology, okay? With respect to manipulative people in general. Now, I have noticed especially that moon in the 8th house, the moon especially being the mind, okay, the way that you think, your thought patterns, your basic personality. The 8th house is a house of secrecy. It's a house of Scorpio, right? Which already is the house that is most connected to psychology. And especially when the moon is in the 8th house in the Navamsha, okay, like if the moon, I've actually seen women, especially women again, but it can also be men, definitely. But with women, especially with respect to relationships, it becomes very relevant because, like I mentioned, I think women are encouraged even further by society, by social norms, to use manipulation and underhanded tactics to get a boyfriend or to get a relationship in general, especially to get married, right? There are even entire books, right, written for women on how to use manipulative strategies to get a ring on your finger, etc., etc. So what I have noticed, that's what I was going to say, is that women, especially who have a lot of 8th house, but especially the moon or Venus in the 8th house, because for a woman, the moon and Venus are how the energies that she most readily identifies with, as opposed to the masculine planets, which she is more likely to project. Unless, of course, there are close aspects between her masculine and feminine planets, but I won't get into that theory. But especially if she has moon or Venus, especially the moon in the 8th house, even in the D1 chart, these women tend to really be like master manipulators. And they are the kind of women who will almost never show their real nature. Like they will always keep themselves hidden. They will plot every step in advance. Everything to them is like strategy, right? It's all about playing chess with other people, especially with respect to relationships, and especially if the 8th house is somehow connected to the planets that indicate relationships, like the 7th house, which is the house of marriage, the 5th house, which is the house of romance, or connected to Jupiter, the husband or something. Well, actually not necessarily connected to Jupiter, because again, it's usually mainly when it's either like the 7th or the 5th house, because this would show her direct attitude towards relationships and how she deals with relationships. And also when the moon and Venus, because this shows how she uses her feminine energy. With the moon, it just shows that this is her nature, okay? So like women with moon in the 8th house especially will tend to plot strategies a lot in life with respect to relationships. But this is especially true in the Navamsha with respect to women who use manipulation to get married. And oftentimes, and I've seen this so often already, like I can't say that it's been like hundreds of cases, but it has definitely been, I would say, a couple dozen cases where I seen moon in the 8th house in the Navamsha, I would ask the woman if she feels alone, and she would say yes. And oftentimes that was the reason why the woman wanted out of the marriage, which, again, makes sense, because if you manipulated your way into the marriage, again, that basically means the person in question has married an image of what he thinks you are and not who you really are, basically. And in order to maintain the relationship, the woman in question has to keep on the act, has to keep pulling strings and manipulating, basically. Okay, and aside from these placements, aside from connections to the 8th house, of course, women with a lot of Scorpio placements, the same thing. But aside from this, there are also different kinds of manipulative behaviors. And I'm going to get into a little bit, again, of a debate here, because I have heard a lot of women, even outside of the realm of astrology, there are women out there who say things like women who are more masculine are not manipulative, whereas women who are traditionally feminine, quote unquote, are more naturally manipulative. I would argue yes and no, but in fact, I would argue that probably the most manipulative women that I've come across are actually women who have a lot of Mars energy, especially Mars connected to the moon. So again, even moon in the 8th house kind of goes hand in hand with this, because the 8th house, being the house of Scorpio, is connected to the energy of Mars and of Ketu. So it's a lot of secrecy, it's a lot of hidden stuff, but basically the 8th house is also a house of power. And people who have a lot of 8th house, they like power games, okay? They like to gain power, first of all. That becomes something they think about a lot, especially when the moon is in the 8th house, in the Navamsha or in the D1, right? But especially when it's in the Navamsha, the woman is more likely to seek power through marriage, right? Because the Navamsha is the chart of marriage. Aside from this, though, what I have seen, especially women with moon in the nakshatras ruled by Mars, are actually potentially the most manipulative women. And this is a little bit counterintuitive, because again, the women who are Mars dominant are not actually traditionally feminine. So on the surface, these are the kinds of women that would not come across as manipulative, and that in itself makes them master manipulators. As far as I have seen, these are probably the biggest chess players out there, especially women who have moon in the Mars dominant nakshatra in the Navamsha, because the Navamsha shows your inner nature, and of course it also again shows how you deal with the marriage and the spouse. And you might think, okay, why Mars though? Because Mars is a pretty direct energy, right? And I have also mentioned this in this video that I made relatively recently with respect to narcissistic abuse, the women that attract narcissists, etc. And I said there that generally Mars dominant women are more direct. Yes and no, okay? They are more direct when it comes to going after what they want. But when it comes to Mars being involved with, let's say, relationship signifiers, think about it this way. Mars is the warrior archetype and the strategist, the general. Mars's job is not really to think about morality, right? That's Jupiter. Jupiter has ideals about what is right and wrong. The sun also cares about what is right and wrong and what is, perfectionism and stuff like that. That's ruled by the sun. Reason, principles, and all that stuff, right? Jupiter is about belief systems and ideals, but Mars is about loyalty, yes, to some extent, but ultimately the Mars archetype is about winning the war by any means necessary, because that is the general archetype. That is the general, the general as in army general archetype, and also the soldier archetype, right? If you've ever heard that saying, all is fair in love and war, that's basically how Mars functions. And if you actually look at, like, for instance, a good example of this is Marilyn Monroe. A lot of people really bought into her image that she was really this delicate little victim. But if you actually looked at her life and her behavior and the things that she achieved, I mean, when you really think about the stuff that she went through, she was actually a very shrewd, strategic person, and also very independent, really. When you like dig under the image of the damsel in distress, she was actually a very willful, independent individual who was single-minded, and she knew how to use everything at her disposal to achieve what she wanted, right? She was born in a very chauvinist era, and she knew that her looks and her beauty and her sexuality was her ticket to get what she wanted, and she really played it to the maximum, you know? And this is the kind of woman that is Mars dominant, which is really counterintuitive. And in fact, see, here's the thing. In a society that is more open-minded, like the West, most of the West, where women have basic rights and women are allowed to go for things directly, the Mars dominant women can take the route, and oftentimes do take the route, of just going for what they want directly without relying on men, without latching on to men. However, in a society that is chauvinistic, these women will adapt, because for them, everything is about winning in life. And if they are given, the only option that they're given is to use men to achieve what they want, they will make the most of that. They will not sit around and be like, well, maybe this is not the right thing to do. And also, let's not forget that Mars is a survivalist at the end of the day. So Mars is all about staying alive, Bee Gees. It's all about staying alive. It's all about surviving, adapting, right, by any means necessary. It's about winning. It's about overcoming the competition. And this is really counterintuitive, because most people, and I've seen some astrologers even say stuff like, it's actually the Venus dominant women, or it's actually the Moon dominant women who are the most manipulative. Not in my experience. And yeah, so these are the kinds of women, especially, and I stress this, if the woman is raised in a very chauvinist, either a chauvinist society, or if she is raised from a young age she's raised by chauvinists, basically, right? She is raised in this kind of mentality that she has to manipulate her way through life. They become master manipulators. Like, just look at the charts of some women that you suspect to be manipulative. And here's the thing, actually, ultimately, is that these women are so good at manipulating their way through life that most people never suspect them, because they're so good at portraying, innocence or what other people expect from them. Whereas, for instance, a Venus dominant woman can also be very manipulative, but the Venus dominant woman, and here's another thing, the reason why the Mars dominant women, I think, are master manipulators is also because the Mars dominant women by nature understand men, right? Because a woman who has a very Mars-like energy is going to understand how men think, how men function. And this is also true if you look at Marilyn Monroe's life, right? She was very, very shrewd in knowing how to present herself in a way that was very attractive to men. And she even had, I remember reading or articles about her where she would boast about it. She would even say, I dress for men. And she would make the most of it, and it's because, especially in her day, it was a very male dominant society, and she knew that this was the main way to get to where she wanted, right? Nowadays, maybe she would have taken a more direct route. Who knows? Okay. Depends. Of course, as usual, you also have to look at what else is happening in the woman's chart. If a Mars dominant woman is very good looking, right, like Marilyn Monroe was, she was probably going to be more tempted to use her looks in some way, right? Because why not? Again, Mars is all about using everything in your arsenal, everything at your disposal to win the war, right? Also leads me to think of, like, if you've seen any documentaries about how some of the great battles of the world were won, like especially these stories of heroism where the winning army was outnumbered 1 to 100 or 1 to whatever, how many hundreds. You would see that the generals or whatever, they used everything. You know, they used the terrain, they used treachery, they used treason, they poisoned like their own people, they poisoned the food sources, they did everything at their disposal. And that's the kind of energy that the Mars archetype embodies. You know, everything that is at your disposal has to be maximized in order to win the war or to get what you want. Okay, and also, yes, like I was saying, because the Mars dominant women understand men from the inside out, they're much more adept at manipulating men actually properly versus women who are Venus dominant. They can manipulate men on a more shallow level. Like a Venus dominant woman, for instance, is more likely to actually read books on how to manipulate men. Or a Venus dominant woman may look at the fact that, oh, men like these kinds of women, or like, you know, men like beauty. They look for, you know, surface reactions, and they try to embody these things, but like without really understanding how they are perceived from the male perspective. At least as far as I have seen. Like, again, I could be totally off, but this is what I've seen about it. Like, the Venus dominant woman is more likely to be like, oh, well, beauty has worked for women throughout history, so it's gonna work for me or something. And they do the best that they can to maximize their looks. But like I said, okay, so they may not have like such a like deep psychological understanding of how men function. Okay, whereas the Mars dominant women really like they're the ones who really probably understand men the best, because Mars is a very typically masculine kind of energy. Now, of course, it does not necessarily mean that every woman who has strong Mars energy will be manipulative, because, like I mentioned, also nowadays, a lot of women have the option of just basically going for the prize through their own efforts without relying on men. And depending on what else is happening in their charts, you know, they're going to go one of many ways that they could go. And so, yes, so there are different kinds of manipulation. I could probably get into a different kind of manipulation for each planet, actually. But these are the two main types, the Venus and the Mars, especially when it comes to relationships, the main two archetypes that are quite relevant. Okay, but aside from this, people who have a lot of Pluto energy, a lot of Scorpio energy, also are going to tend to be naturally manipulative. Like, especially with Pluto, because Pluto is a very power hungry, especially people who have a lot of conjunctions, like conjunction between Mars and Pluto, Moon and Pluto, Sun and Pluto. Especially with the Mars, that's a very power hungry conjunction. So these people are very likely to be very manipulative. Like, they tend to be secretive. They do not really make their real nature or their real intentions known. Okay. But yeah, pretty much. Like, I'm pretty sure that I'm forgetting to say something about this topic, but I might make a part 2 if I remember anything significant. But these are some of the main things that I wanted to talk about with respect to being called manipulative. Okay, so I hope you have enjoyed it once again, and if you have, please like, subscribe, hit the notifications bell to see when I will post a new video, and also please comment in the comment section with respect to what you like, what you didn't like, and also if you have any suggestions for future videos. And also, if you're interested in a personal consultation, I do consultations on a wide variety of topics. Please check out the video description. I will leave my contact information there. Thank you.